Hi, everyone. I am Connie Zack, one of the owners of Sunlighten, and we are here today for Sunlighten Spotlight. This is one of my favorite things that we do each month, and we always get to have the opportunity to talk to such amazing experts. And today we have a wonderful expert on sleep. I can't wait to get started. We have Mollie McGlocklin, who is the founder and creator of Sleep is a Skill and Sleep is a Skill podcast. Mollie and her company are dedicated to optimizing sleep through a unique blend of accountability, technology, as well as there's one more.
Behavioral change.
Behavioral change. I knew there were three.
I know. Yeah, there's a lot of them. Yeah.
There's a lot of why I just think it's so fascinating that this is a skill and
Right.
Like you have so much to teach us. So welcome to Mollie, Sunlighten's friend and expert on sleep. So Mollie, before we get into some of the questions I have, I was reading your backstory and, when you were in Rome and that entire story, which is fascinating. Can you share with everyone who's not familiar with why you started to focus on sleep being a skill and bringing all these wonderful, tips to the forefront?
Of course. Yes. And thank you also just so much for having me. I so appreciate the time and I'm a big fan of Sunlighten myself. So really looking forward to this conversation today. And yes, so the backstory, I think, gives context to the why of taking this step to create Sleep as a Skill and all that's kind of come out of it, because I hope, can provide a sense of empowerment for anyone that might be struggling with their sleep right now, or just coming from a place of that they're looking to up-level their sleep. Because my story was one of just, really needing to figure this problem out for myself. It was solving my own problem that I was struggling with, which was my sleep. So what that looked like for me was kind of a 3-part kind of series. So the first part of my life really had a lot of fixed ways of relating to my sleep and a lot of fixed labels. And people might relate to this where they're a night owl, that's in their genes. I'm a bad sleeper. It's just always going to kind of be like this. I got to, just survive this. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's a mental thing. All of these sort of narratives, that's what I was swimming within. And from that place, I had it that there wasn't much to do about it. It was kind of just, that's how it was for me, and that's how it's going to be. And I, as a serial entrepreneur in Manhattan, burning the candle at both ends, as the years went on, I started getting more and more exaggerated in my patterns with this. And I would get more justified and righteous because I would go to bed later and later. And then I would say, well, I can make my own hours. So what's the big deal? Not a problem. Then not connecting all of these things that really started to come up that showed some signs that something wasn't working with the way I was managing my life. So I was having more and more instances of anxiety. I was having the beginnings of an ulcer. I had shingles in my 20s, all of these things, right? The body's really saying something is not working here. And I wasn't answering those kind of signs and with the connection to the sleep component. And it was not until I went through this period of insomnia, which really changed my life. And this was traveling internationally. My fiance and I decided to take our businesses on the road and all that stress that I talked about. Yeah, let's bring it on the road with a one-way ticket to like exploring the world. That seems like a good idea. And in that, just the stress, how that culminated was I could not sleep. And, certainly lots of different kind of rock bottom moments during that. One of them was actually going to the doctors in Croatia with Google Translate and saying, help, I can't sleep. What do I do? And leaving with their version of Ambien. And in that moment, really realizing, okay, I got to get this handled. And especially coming from a background with family that had a lot of kind of tendencies down prescription medication paths that really concerned me of what this would mean in the long run if I continue down this path. So that really set me down, understanding more about this, what it is to sleep, how can I get up under this and really make a difference here. And what I discovered really changed my whole life. It was this understanding of chronobiology, really the science of time and how this affects our health and our well-being, and our circadian rhythm entrainment, and how we can entrain so many of the habits, behaviors, thoughts that we're having throughout the course of the day, and how that can impact our sleep results. So out of it, once I really got up under my sleep. Then it organically started working, just with people because I couldn't stop talking about it. And then it grew to, small groups, one-on-ones, online courses, weekly podcasts, weekly newsletter. And so this whole world got created. Now we're in hotels in Manhattan, and we work with kind of high stakes poker players, UFC fighters, high performance individuals, and really truly believe that sleep is a skill. And so today we'll talk about some of the things we can do to make a difference with it.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing your backstory. I had it when I was reading, when you were in Rome and you had that kind of panic attack. I could just like see it. And it's just like, I think it was 3 days you said that you couldn't sleep. And, and when you're traveling, it's always bad, but that's the worst when you're traveling, right? Because you're there to enjoy Rome and the Colosseum and all of the things. And, so yes. I feel so bad for you. I'm so.
Oh, well, thank you. And for context for any listeners, what that was that was kind of one of the apex moments. There was a couple like moments, right, that just really shook me up, and that was one of them. When in the middle of the Coliseum, where the tour group and family had come in to meet up with us, and I'm having a panic. I got to get out of here. And in the moment, it was one of those instances, seeing that something's got to change, and this is not, we cannot continue on with life in this way. And it really showed me the importance of sleep. And I think, I can be a kind of stubborn personality, I think, at times. And so I think it took, unfortunately, really that true wake up call for me to really get the gravity of the importance of sleep in my life. And now I'm so grateful for that moment, because those moments, because now my life looks totally different from that. And so much learning and growth came out of it.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of that learning. One of the most fascinating parts I was reading was your study of chronobiology, right? And because, it sounds like your position is a little bit different than other sleep experts that, I read. You're really wanting to teach people how to build their skill sets, right? And like sleep is a muscle, sleep is a skill set, sleep is something that you can learn. So tell us what is chronobiology? I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, but and then what have you learned that can help everyone improve their skill of sleep?
Yes, absolutely. So one, if anyone's even questioning this conversation of how can sleep be a skill, if it's something that we innately do, I do totally get the irony of the fact that it's something that, infants are doing, kids are doing, and yet somehow along the way, there's been this massive breakdown in our society of our ability to consistently get that sleep. There's something that's not working as well as it could to be able to actually have this innate skill set, really function automatically without a lot of pushing or help or external sources that we might go to, or things of that nature. So making this argument that sleep is a skill really goes to the departure, because I get, if I was to go back into history, go to kind of hunter-gatherer days and make this argument to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, it might have been a different conversation. And that is part of what we're looking at today, is because we've become so divorced from those rhythms of nature, and not in a woo-woo sense, in a very literal, hardwired biological sense, that those really handled a lot of this for us. And it's the more that we've gotten disconnected from those rhythms, and we can measure this. So the EPA in 2001 had done a study where they found that the average American at that time in 2001 was spending on average 93% of their days inside, whether it's inside or in an automobile. And the reason we say that, as why are we talking about that for sleep? Because that means that the average person at that time was only spending 7% of their days outside in nature. And we can assume that with a pandemic and more laptops and phones and all the things we got inside, there's probably even more indoor living. The reason that that's really important to this whole conversation is because there's something called circadian rhythm, or circadian rhythm, or 24-hour rhythm. And many people might be familiar with that. But what people might not be familiar with is the fact that it really exists on the spectrum. And you can either be on the weak side of your circadian rhythm or a strong, robust side of your circadian rhythm. And the things that you do throughout the entire course of the day, from the moment you wake up, decide, are you kind of moving towards that stronger side or weaker side of your circadian rhythm? So
Hmm.
What that means is that there are these time givers known as zeitgebers, and this is in this world of chronobiology, which is that science of time and how time and rhythms affect our health. And so throughout the course of the day, all of these rhythms are kind of going on and happening. And based on how we interact with those will strengthen that circadian rhythm or not. So those time givers, known as zeitgebers, there's a couple big ones, and I'll definitely hit on some of the top most important ones today for the practical takeaways. So the top most important one is light. So the timing of your light, the intensity of the light, the quality of your light, all of those things are going to really, really significantly influence the strength of that circadian rhythm. So when I use myself as an example of kind of what not to do, for all those years, I was living on upside down sort of rhythm. I was getting light in the middle of the night because then I would say, oh, that's when I'm most creative and I'm going to do all my work then and all that. And I'd be sleeping in the day and so all in darkness during the day. So all of that is very confusing for the circadian rhythm and kind of doesn't know for these multiple clocks that exist in virtually every cell in your body, known as peripheral clocks, and they all communicate to this master clock, our suprachiasmatic nucleus in our brain. And so if we are out of alignment, if those time givers are not consistent, then it can really wreak havoc on multiple areas of our body and our health. And particularly, I'm particularly passionate about the mental health element of that, the anxiety, the kind of emotional regulation, productivity, our ability to kind of fire at all cylinders, and really, be effective in our day-to-day experience of life that can really get impacted when we're not getting that type of sleep and those rhythms aren't being aligned the same way. So that first one, light, and then, we can talk about some of the other ones, but the first one, light, if you get nothing out of what I'm saying, my hope is that you get that instead of focusing as much on the night, and of course, the how we structure our nights are incredibly important. And we can talk about that, but I think it really can be empowering for people versus feeling at the effect of their sleep to start looking at the very first part of your day when you first wake up and getting something known as sunlight anchoring. So sunlight anchoring is really the concept that you're getting outside on that first half of your day and getting sunlight in your eyes, and you're getting it on your, so consistently on your eyes. So no sunglasses, hats, all of that, because that's going to help reset that circadian rhythm each day. Where you might be on the globe is going to affect the amount of time that you might need to be outside, and because of the strength of the sun and seasons and what have you. But just beginning with that, knowing that you're going to at least get some of those few minutes in the first half of your day, that's going to help tune that rhythm, and then it will actually say what time you're going to get sleepy by the end of the night, because it's really connected as a real cause and effect. You can expect around 16 hours countdown, but from the first start when you get that bright shot of light to when you're going to get sleepy later on in the evening. So think about it from a strategic perspective. And if you're traveling or for whatever reason, you might need to be staying up later, you got to go to a wedding or something's happening, then you can strategically delay what time you're going to get that first shot of sunlight, because that will actually help you to stay up later. So we have a lot of say in our results at the end of the day and going into the night.
That's fascinating. So I'm going to summarize that in a sec and see if I understood what you said about the first shot, because this is like really powerful. So when you wake up, let's say you wake up at 5 in the morning.
Yeah.
So that's a bad example because the sun's not up yet, right? So let's say you wake up at 6. So
yeah.
And then are you saying that if I get up and I go outside and I look and I get, sun on my eyes naturally without, sunglasses, and I spend some time out, how much time are we thinking? Like, is it just like a little bit, like a couple of minutes, just so like there's that connection, or do you actually have to spend some time, like longer outside?
Great questions. Okay, if you're waking up around 6 and assuming that the sunrise is happening shortly, right around that time, you're getting yourself outside specifically to, because some people might skip over this part and say, well, I've got these big windows, I'm fine. So there's certain studies that point to that it can take 50 to 100 times longer to reset that master clock from behind a window. It's still helpful, but it's gonna not be as impactful as actually physically getting yourself outside. And then to your question of the length, the time, so this can really adjust throughout the course of the day, throughout the course of the year, based on where you might be on, so a northern latitude location or a southern latitude location. So what we want to do, there is an app called DMinder that can be helpful too in this conversation of, because it will kind of geotag you where you are, because I have clients that are in Sweden, and so certain periods of the year it's total darkness or total light, so they have to even be more linked up with how long they need to be out there, or have a faux sort of cue with internal lights, lights inside that they can use in lieu of that. So one thing that you can do is in latitude locations in the winter months, and really we're talking about post October into March. There's a huge period of time in some of those locations that can be really challenging to get the strength of the sun, both for vitamin D component, because that's a precursor to serotonin, which is a precursor to melatonin, which obviously we want to be able to create sufficient amount of that. So for the vitamin D component, but then also the strength of that sun and how long you can be outside. So at least from a behavioral change perspective, we want to make it winnable. So even if you begin with a few minutes outside, so if you even start with around 5 minutes and work your way up, that's great. But I want to definitely call out, because it's a great question, that a lot of people say, "Ugh, that's not for me. I'm in Canada. It's December, it's too dark, it's the sun isn't powerful enough, skip it." But we actually want to do the opposite. So during those periods of time, we actually want to be outside even longer, because the duration can help kind of offset the limited strength of the sun during those periods. And the first half of the day has more infrared rich sunlight, which has a whole host of benefits as well. And people will buy really expensive infrared panels and all these things, and they can be really, really helpful. And you can also have access to that available with the sun too, to further complement that. So that's what you really want to focus on in the first half. And then you also would we'd also like to have you be present for sunset, because that also sets a cascade of signals that now we're going to be winding down in the evening and shifting over, and kind of helps inoculate you from the impacts of kind of more blues and green tone lights in the evening that can be more stimulating and can affect your melatonin production.
Fascinating. So just to finish that thought, so if 6 o'clock, because I was fascinated with the 16 hours, because because that's a planning and strategic. And I'm just, like thinking of everybody who goes on trips, and you're always trying to figure out, okay, when I travel, how do I manage my sleep? So if I'm at 6 o'clock, I'm outside, I have that connection with the sun, 16 hours, so 10 o'clock, is that right? So I can kind of plan on, I'm going to make connection with the sunset, because that's going to start to tell me, okay, now like we're kind of winding down, but like my body should start to get into, a ready for sleep around 10 o'clock.
Yes. So a couple things about that. One, if you are strategically trying to plan, a great app, no affiliation, but a great app is called Time Shifter. And that one, it's really, really helpful, because you can set in your itinerary or where you might be going. And they're also have created another line of that for shift workers. So if anyone's a shift worker listening, that's incredibly important for them to really have that kind of clear understanding of all these things that can help support them. That app can be helpful to really just plug and go, and it will tell you when you want to get bright light exposure. But then on the flip side, which is the second, element to this kind of Zeitgeber or time giver, is darkness and the presence of darkness. So darkness is going to then help produce this, melatonin is known as the vampire hormone. And it's known as that because its presence, is secreted during darkness and the presence of darkness. So I think it really behooves us then to ensure that we're prioritizing dim, incredibly dim, to totally dark while we're sleeping, lighting more so than I think a lot of people might realize. And they might skip this one too, because they say, oh, I just got the little, light over here. It's not a big deal. but even those 60-watt bulbs and that little, nightlight and this thing, all of that kind of, add up of amount of lux that's in your environment. And you can even test this. There's apps that will measure the lux in your environment. And that will signal to the body that, okay, well, I guess, light is present, because for thousands of years, we'd only have the presence of the sun. So this is very kind of foreign information, and it's kind of confusing. So that's something you can really play with. So candle lights in the evening, red lights, Himalayan salt lights, fire, all of those things tend to be more support that development of melatonin in the evening, in alignment with that kind of strategy that you're bringing in, kind of that around. And I want to be clear too, it's around 16 hours. So it does depend on the person, how much light they got, how much darkness they're getting, their production of melatonin, their age, a lot of things. But it can give you a somewhat of a gauge and help you have that real understanding of the cause and effect that those things you do during the day absolutely impact your results in the night.
Fantastic. Okay, so I want to hear some more tips. So we know, if there's one thing to remember, it's the light at the beginning of the day, and there's also I also got the sun setting part, because I thought that was a really great tip, and it just makes, if you think back, historically, it makes so much sense, because that's the way it was forever, right? What else can you teach us? Yeah.
Yes, sure. So a second really important rung of Zeitgebers or time givers is temperature. So temperature plays a huge role. And I know, of course, with Sunlighten and Sauna really being able to leverage that power of temperature, it's a big, big deal. And actually nestled underneath temperature are other things, other behaviors that we might be doing that can either heat the body up or cool the body down. And we want to be connected to those, because that can really give us power in helping to either set us up for sleep or, kind of do the opposite. So a couple things. One, temperature throughout the course of the day, our body temperature is meant to fluctuate. And we do have an expectation that we'll get some of that higher body temperature kind of going up nicely throughout the course of the day, and then dropping in the evening. And that drop is super important, because that kind of cues the body to prepare for sleep, to wind us down. And so when there's the absence of that, and that has become more of a common thing, where there's that delayed temperature decrease, and people aren't getting that same signal, because of course, using the blueprint of ancestral days, when the sun would set, it's cold, or cooler than it had been. So that was just a kind of workable solution or workable situation and system that we had. And that was the cue. And then we would fall asleep, a few hours after that point. But since we might be devoid of that, what you can do is, one, your ambient environment, ensuring that when you first wake up, if you have the ability, you can turn up the heat in your space to kind of help facilitate that. We want the day to be energetic and movement and lots of things happening. If you want to, utilize things like the sauna or contrast therapies, that those can be a helpful time to kind of play with some of those. But then in the evening, we want to facilitate the cooling process, so you can cool incrementally in your space. If you have the AC capabilities, you can begin to slowly lower the temperature in your space, and that will start to cue the body for sleep. And then definitely while you're sleeping, you want it to be as cool as possible. Some people get, cooling mattress pads and different, jets and things that you can do to make your sleep environment really cool, and you can measurably see the difference that can often make. But for the temperature side of things, sauna can be really, really helpful too. And, hot baths and hot showers to strategically bring up that body temperature. And then by virtue of then the process of sort of cooling that down, that counterintuitively can actually get us cooler than we would have without the presence of that heat. So I know it can be a little confusing, and, give yourself a buffer period of time before, the sauna, and then just before going straight to bed, or the hot shower or the bath, because you want to help facilitate that process. That's going to be really, really helpful. And then I think real quick, one of the other things I'd want to for sure put in that has a lot of new growing research around it is meal timing. And meal timing is connected to this temperature topic, because when we eat, our body really heats up from the process of that digestion and all that goes into the process of processing that food. So the timing that we eat is going to be really a good strategy to bring into. And also if you're traveling or doing other things, you want to leverage that. So just remembering that we're aiming to have our meal timing largely within the rising and the setting of the sun. It's known as circadian rhythm intermittent fasting. And then you're starting to just notice if you're skewing out a bit later into the evening and eating a lot during total darkness, because we want to try to experiment. It's bio-individual. It depends on the person, but we want to experiment with what happens when we give ourselves really sufficient time before bed. And I often have people playing with around 4 hours, sometimes even 5 hours before sleep, that's they're having their last bite of food, and that includes snacks and a lot of these other things that we might not kind of log as actual feeding periods. And if people want to get more information about this, there's a great book, The Circadian Code by Sachin Panda. A lot of great research there to learn more about how that can influence. But that's a really common one that I see that people can really leverage like tonight.
Great. So light, temperature, meal times. Back to temperature.
Yes.
I want to touch on this
Sure.
for the listeners. I'm sure we have a lot of Sunlighten listeners that are using their Sunlighten sauna, and I get asked this a lot, and like I'm so excited to have you. It sounds like you said you can, because people always say, when? Tell me, Connie, when is the optimal time for me to use my Sunlighten and protocol? So is your protocol, you sound like the best is in the morning because that connects to kind of increasing your core temperature. Can you walk us through like your tips for using your Sunlighten sauna, and when would you do it for optimal sleep?
Yeah, really good questions. So there are still kind of conflicting research on this topic. And I have seen even objectively for N=1 experiences where people love to do the flip, and people vehemently kind of say, no, you got to do it at night. No, you got to do it in the day. So I will say that what has become a bit more established in as far as just contrast therapy and when to put cold and when to put heat is by and large that you can aim to have the cold in the morning. So that's going to be the thing that's going to actually kind of wake you up and bring that dopamine hit and that kind of excitatory process, kind of that aliveness that often people will pair with the sauna if they have that luxury, if that's available to them. Because of course the complementary benefits that can come from both. And the evening is often reserved for more the heat exposure. But I will say that with sauna, what I've seen for people is that if we play around with the timing, and depending on cardiovascular health and other things, that we might be moving the sauna time a bit earlier in your evening if you have that possibility for yourself, because then that gives you sufficient time to bring the heart rate down, kind of calm us down, and also use it as a nice marker. Like I've seen people make really nice rituals out of it where kind of like, okay, they're done with the day, they close the laptop, and then kind of but that with the sauna time and relaxation and winding down. So that I've seen to be a nice way to kind of have enough of a buffer period in there. Because that's the only, call out is that I've seen people say, well, I read that you're supposed to have, hot shower, hot bath, what have you, right before bed. But it might kind of wake them up a bit because it does take that time to calm that down and calm down the body. So you're playing with the time for you, but that's more what we've been seeing is kind of making an important stack. And then with the call outs for the cold element of things, that you could even end. If you are finding that you're playing with the sauna in the morning, bringing in a bit of that colds as well to kind of the wake up process too.
Yeah, great tips. And I've had the same. I can tell you countless stories, success stories.
Yes.
With both examples, and one of the elements that you just said that I really, really like, and I want to just really echo, was if you're doing it in the evening, it is nice to have the intention to do it like with closing down. So it's really, even though you're going to allow plenty of time before you actually go to bed, I liked your mention of, okay, work done, you're kind of starting, you're winding down. It's like we were talking about before we went live, when I had my kids, and I was really adamant about the rituals of, okay, there's the bath and there's the book and there, and then there's bed. And and so like you get used to, oh, the bath, that means I'm going to have a book and then I'm going to have bed. And it's the same thing with adults. It's like I have my sauna, I'm going to, relax and have some time in between so your body is completely cool, because we know scientifically we are elevating the body's core temperature. And if temperature is important, you need to have plenty of time to cool it down before before you get into bed. So I know we're running out of time, but I did want to ask a very, very common question that happened. And it seems as though everybody I talked to, we're in this phase where people aren't sleeping through the night, right?
Yeah.
So what do you say to those who say, I'm a good sleeper, but then I'll wake up and then my mind starts going and then I struggle getting back to sleep?
Yeah.
What's your thought to those people?
Very common, the wake up concern. And I've actually anecdotally seen more of those upticks for certain people, even post-COVID, and difficulty, when they're going through periods with their health. It just has been a common one that they might even have more flare-ups and times that they might go through this. So lots of things that we can do for wake ups, because they can be there can be many, many reasons at the root of this. I would say starting with some of the really common ones, really just getting established with regularity, particularly picking one wake up time and really sticking with that, with the aim to stick to that around 365 days a year, which I know for many of us can feel foreign. And we're aiming for that to really only wiggle around 30 minutes plus or minus on either side of that. Even if you are having a night where it's a later night and something's happening, fun, spontaneity, and yet we're maintaining that same wake up time across the board. The difference that can make for a lot of people can be profound just in and of itself, because they might say, well, I largely do that, but just the weekends skew a bit. But that weekend element creates something known as social jet lag. And social jet lag is something of self-created jet lag. We haven't gone anywhere, but we're experiencing those elements of jet lag, and it can affect immune system, it can affect our mental capabilities. It can really have a real snowball effect, where then you're spending the first half of your week trying to get yourself kind of back onto your time zone, if you will, quote unquote. And so that can cause more wake ups, because when the body doesn't know what it's kind of supposed to be doing and when, that can confuse the system. Blood glucose levels is another really common one that I see. So we often have people wearing continuous glucose monitors so we can see, is their blood sugar crashing throughout the course of the night? And this does not just apply to people with diabetes or what have you. You might kind of zone out on that topic and say that's not for me, but it's really surprising how many of us that really consider ourselves, healthy, and I've continued to work on this myself, as well as so many clients that will consider, oh, I'll be fine. And then you put those monitors on and you can see a lot of variability that can be happening. And when there's that crashing during the evening, we did a focus group with Levels Health and Oura Ring, and would see that when there would be certain crashes, there would more of a tendency to have those wake ups. And the problem with these type of wake ups is when you have that crash, it tends to be a stressor to the body, and it's saying, okay, we got to get food, or we got to restore this. So that can bring about a bit more of that cortisol, adrenaline response. And then that's that type of wake up where it's not just like you wake up briefly, it's like you're up now and it's 3 a.m. or what have you.
Right.
So those can be common ones. Other really common ones are the eating too late, and that's kind of connected to that. We spoke about that. Doing things that are much more excitatory in the evening, so you're having kind of a delayed onset of sleep. And then even with going to sleep, then you might kind of have thrown things off, so you're having those wake ups in the early morning hours. Cortisol pulse happens in the early morning hours, so it's something that we want to facilitate. It's like natural coffee, a pulse of cortisol in the morning. But if things get out of whack and you're just like really burning the candle both ends, stress, sometimes we can have that pulse be a bit too high and augmented, and now you're waking up in that kind of stress response and not being able to kind of calm the body back down. Insufficient melatonin production, so those things that we talked about that can help facilitate getting that great naturally derived melatonin production. If we haven't done those things, then that might be affecting those early morning hours. Other things, alcohol, caffeine, anxiety, depression, all of those can be at the source of that. And also even like temperature and getting hot, some of those wake ups, and then health issues. So this is where it gets to like sleep as a skill. I had a client that called it forensic sleepology, because have to you have to go through a lot of different things.
That's awesome.
I know. I thought that was great. And so,
Yes.
because it's so much of that, because
Right.
for one person, it might be really handled by setting that same wake up time, what have you. And other people say, no, I always have the same wake up time. But when we go deeper, they might have some gut health issues, and we might discover there's mold in their environment. And, so that's where it can get more layered.
Yeah. Well, if everyone listening is like me and wants to get more questions answered and wants to stay connected and get tips, what can people do to stay connected to you? Because we're gonna have to wrap up, and I mean I could sit here all day and talk to you about. I mean, we have so many questions, and this is such an important topic, right now. And so, what are you doing in your company to help people with information and get them more information regarding sleep?
Sure. Yeah. Well, one, I acknowledge you for your interest and fascination in what I believe to be one of the most important areas steps that you can take for your health and well-being. And from this foundation, then we can layer in all those other great things that can help support our health. But really getting this handled is so important. That's why, I really support the company that you've created, just because it can make such a difference for people that are dealing with a number of different things that Sauna can be beneficial for, as by virtue of sleep. So having said that, then lots of different ways that we want to make sure we're available to really support people, because our aim is to really help transform this conversation of sleep on the planet. So from that place, we really aiming to get lots of free content out consistently. So if you do go to sleepisaskill.com, you can take a free sleep assessment and get kind of more tailored responses back to you around just some resources that you can begin to go through to help support your own sleep. You can also sign up for our weekly newsletter. We're on 100 and almost, I think, 90 editions of that every Monday. Lots of, stats and sleep experiments and things. And please respond to those. We'd like to make a community feel. We have weekly podcasts with sleep experts to really go deeper on these topics. And then if you are really, really struggling and you're looking for support, we have cohort-based groups where everyone's wearing a sleep tracker to go through that process of sort of the skill of sleep. And then we also have one-on-one 90-day programs too, to really, with the aim that by the end of that, people are really set up powerfully with these tools that they can use for the rest of their life.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for doing all of that. And so for people who are watching this, who one of the things I'm so passionate about is I have this comment called the mental tape that I can't, it's just I really get frustrated when people play these mental tapes, the same mental tapes over and over again.
Yes.
And expect a different result. And there's these mental tapes that I hear it all. I have so many friends who say, oh, I'm just a bad sleeper. I'm just a bad sleeper. And, or they just accept it. Right. And I can't stand that. It's don't accept something that's so important. There's an answer, right? So anybody, if you have that mental tape, A, you got to stop it, and B, get connected to Mollie and her company and find answers, and change that mental tape that you got to stop it and change it. And there's a solution. And so, what you're doing with Sleep is a Skill and your podcast and your newsletters and, all of your information, I applaud you. Keep doing it. It's so important. You're making a difference. You're making an impact. And it's such an important impact because, we know all the things that happen while we sleep and we regenerate and, nothing is better. I mean, really, there's not much better than a great night's sleep.
Yes.
I mean,
preach.
So,
yes. Totally. Well, thank you so much for saying that. I know exactly.
I got your back.
We're so kindred spirits on this topic because I know that you also really value the importance of this, and the company you've created can really help support this as well. And I really hope that people listening can take on and be empowered by this conversation that sleep is a skill. So from that, you can have this blank canvas and you no longer have to be from operating from these labels or those, kind of scripts or tapes. Right. Because 100%, and to use myself as an example, because I was, in one of those tapes for years and I got not great results by being in that. And so really interrupting those tapes are crucial. And then there can be a really excitement by having that curiosity to, what does really happen during this thing that we do, a third of our life. And the more that we go down, I promise listeners that it's just such a rewarding area and really just a fascinating area of study.
Yes. Yes, keep doing it. So I have to log off now. I'm so bummed. This has just been so valuable. And I thank you so much for everything. And Sunlighten does partner with Mollie, and anybody who is listening, if we are doing a special promotion. And so all you need to do is make sure you mention, Mollie and Sleep is a Skill, and you will have access to our special promotion. So please make sure you do that. And, if you don't have your own Sunlighten to help you sleep, then you need to go someplace and find one. I'm telling you, we could talk about another show about all of the benefits that we know for 20 years of how it can help you sleep. So thank you. And thank you to all the listeners for watching and listening to Sunlighten Spotlight. And I wish you all a wonderful month, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. Amazing.
Thank you, Mollie.